The less you eat, drink, and read books, the less you go to the theater, the dance hall, the public house, the less you think, love, theorize, sing, paint, fence, the more you save, the greater becomes your treasure which neither moths nor dust will devour, your capital. The less you are, the more you have. The less you express your own life, the greater is your alienated life. The greater is the store of your estranged being. Karl Marx, Economic and Philosophical Manuscripts. The Daily Grind, Chapter 222. Space snapped into place around him with the smell of fresh-baked chocolate chip cookies. This was, in and of itself, not the weirdest experience James had ever had. It was the most pleasant teleport he'd ever been offered, though, although his skin did tingle slightly. He assumed it was a teleport anyway. It had that feel to it, and the fact that he could say that was just another sign of how weird his life had gotten. The telepads were still his gold standard for teleportation as a day-to-day travel method. He wasn't a fan of the weird wolf pack make a bubble of somewhere else thing that they had going on, since it kind of had a lot of turbulence for him so far. Also, while he couldn't prove that it was teleportation and not just flinging stuff around, he hated whatever the Akashic Sewer used to do, just on principle. And because it smelled awful. This one, in contrast, smelled great, and the only problem it had generated was the wave of painless heat and light seemed to have removed Alex from existence. That might just be the cafe smell, though. They were still in the cafe. As James blinked spots out of his vision, the whole place seemed to still be around them. Dark wood walls, tiny potted plants, stylish decorations still intact. The lights were out, though, and whatever was outside the windows was similarly dark. Someone was screaming. A lot of people were screaming, actually, but one of them sounded bad, the kind of hoarse, devastated scream of somebody who had been hurt in a way they didn't know was possible. Harlan got their bearings before James did, jerked their arm out of his grip with an exact motion, and made the situation worse by shooting the man that had brought the cube in another 3 times in the head. If he wasn't dead before, he was now. The body slumped against the wooden cabinet next to a garbage can, not reacting except to jerk as Harlan added more gore to the scene. "Stop fucking shooting people!" James bellowed. Harlan shot James an irate look, but at least didn't keep pulling the trigger. Around them, the cries and screams kept going. People who'd been thrown to the floor by whatever had happened, or who were just taking cover already, yelling for help or pleading not to be shot. The cafe had devolved into chaos. James, though, zeroed in on the scream that sounded like it was somebody injured and ran to that, moving as well as he could in the cover of darkness. There was still some light from glowing points outside the windows that looked like streetlights, though after what had just happened, James wasn't about to claim he knew that's what they were with any certainty. Between that and the score of phones and laptop screens, a few people fumbling for their flashlight feature, James made it to the man next to the front door without tripping. He was still screaming as James crouched near him and instantly found the problem. His arm was missing. Severed off just above the elbow, a disc of flesh and exposed bone showing that James would have called clean if not for the river of blood draining out of it. "Medic?" he yelled. "Alex, where the fuck—" James was halfway through yanking his coat off and wrapping it around the man's stump when he remembered that Alex was gone. "Harlan, or anyone who's a doctor, or something." He clamped his hands tight around the man's wound. "Stop thrashing, man. Help me hold this." One of the patrons crawled over to where James was, keeping low. "Holy fuck," the man said when he saw the bloody mess. "He wasn't shot." He didn't explain anything, just pushing James's hand aside firmly and pulling the sleeves of the coat into a makeshift tourniquet. "Hold this," he said in a low but stern voice to the dazed victim. "Of course not," Harlan's voice cut above the ongoing cries. "I don't miss. What happened?" "Guy's arm's missing," James said. "Also, what the fuck? Put your gun away." The other man who'd made his way to James blanched as Harlan casually walked up to them. "I'm just an EMT, man." Harlan didn't reply to him. "We're outside somewhere," they said, trying to look out the windows of the cafe. "You should calm everyone down before—" A cluster of people made a break for it, running from the gunshots and whatever the explosion of light had been. 4 or 5 young people who looked like students abandoning books and laptops to sprint for the back door. Wait, no! James's brain suddenly realized what Harlan meant when they said outside. Wait, don't go out! The other patrons ducked as he yelled, while one of the students screamed again, and they rushed to yank the glass-paneled door open and flee into the night. James was no stranger to panic, and how it could blind you to obvious things, but he was pretty sure they should have noticed how the afternoon, gray and dim as it was, had spontaneously transformed into pitch-black night. And he was already running after them because he saw where this was going. Heedless, the kids sprinted out of the cafe in a mad rush, across the sidewalk that had not been behind the cafe before, into the street. It was only when they realized they had run onto asphalt that they started to slow in confusion, which was when one of the street lights twisted down next to them, the orange glowing bulb in it casting unfamiliar angled shadows across the road as it peered at them like a lit eye. The students paused. Even inside the cafe, as he ran past, James could see some of the other patrons staring out the open door, screams dying to confused whispers, or different screams, as the shadows stretched around the fleeing group. They stood transfixed as something strange and wonderful and completely new happened to them, a piece of what should have been civil terrain, bending like a curious snake to look at them, light cast around like a kaleidoscope. Then, one of the translucent shapes in those shadows lunged out and wrapped around one of the girls, and made a sickening crunch as barely visible fangs, hidden in the lengthening shadows, pierced into her skin and flesh. James leapt over the sidewalk as his high-speed sprint got him close enough, slamming his shoulder into the second fanged shadow and knocking it back briefly as the streetlight turned its glowing eye to him. "Back in the fucking cafe!" he shouted. The students did not listen, and instead started to scatter, with one of them trying to grab their friend who was being lifted off the ground. James shoved the guy aside and drew his pistol from the concealed holster at his back, rapidly firing into the space where he could see something like a thin film in the air that connected the teeth to the lamp. Clear blood spilled, and after the 5th or 6th shot it had dropped the girl and jerked backward, which was when James let out a breath, calling on his climb spell to manifest a third arm that he gave spiked knuckles to the fist of, and slammed it into the incoming second set of invisible fangs. He shifted his stance slightly, unloading the rest of his magazine into the street lamp, shattering the crystal covering and popping the bulb. The body of it went limp, sprawling into a loose coil of metal flesh on the asphalt. James felt like he'd taken something from it. That was uncomfortable. "What is happening?" the guy screamed in terror. "I'll tell you in a second. Get back inside." James pointed back at the cafe with his extra arm. He noted that the translucent attacking things were a lot more visible when there were fewer weird shadows around them, or maybe when whatever they were wrapped around was dead. But there were still streetlights all down this road at irregular intervals, and James needed to catch up to the others. With his normal hands, he flicked the empty magazine out of his gun and smoothly pulled another from his belt to reload, lamenting that he hadn't brought a gun bangle with him, or the fucking fireball gun. Okay, he took a deep breath, trying to banish the creeping chill from his use of a mountain spell, and then started running after the others who had scattered. He got to 3 of them before they got too far, and was greeted by a scream, "Please don't kill me," from one of them, who reflexively covered her face with her hands. The scream made James wince, for a lot of reasons, but mostly because this was a dungeon. "I'm not going to kill you," he said in a low voice. "I didn't do this, I don't know what happened, but this place is wrong. Get back to the cafe, it's going to be safer there, please. Your friend is hurt and needs you there." He punctuated the words by holstering his gun and spreading his hands. One of them pointed, open-mouthed, at his extra arm, the blue-tinted ice seeming to host a deep darkness in the gloom of the street. "Look, that's not the weirdest thing here," James said. "You just got attacked by a lamp. Come on." There was a scream from the other direction down the road, and James smothered a groan. "Lopa!" one of the guys yelled, and started doing that kind of half-run toward the source, craning his neck like he was trying to see what was happening. "We have to—" "Cafe," James said, gesturing with his other hand. "I've got this." His gun was back in his palm, the weight disturbing in how comforting it had become as he started running. He zeroed in on another scream, soles of his shoes pounding on dark asphalt as he let his purple enhancements push him beyond how fast a human was supposed to be able to get up to speed. He found the girl sprawled on the sidewalk a half block away, next to a leafy hedge in front of what looked like the silhouette of a suburban home. James didn't have time to take in the scenery, as the girl was currently kicking at something that looked like it was growing out of the hedge. 4 legs and a flat muzzle, the impression of the shape of a dog, only with thick skin and some kind of twisting organic lines leading back to the vegetation, ridges running down its side like it was made out of a pumpkin. James arrived and aimed an awkward kick at its head, sending the creature jerking back with a wet crack as its hide split open. It smelled like a pumpkin, too, pungent and rotten. Before it could recover, James grabbed the girl's outstretched hand and hauled her up. "Let's get the fuck out of here," he said, leading her back to the cafe. By the time they returned, things had not calmed down. There was more yelling, more people trying to leave, 2 people who were directly yelling at Harlan, who was just ignoring them, but at least they hadn't tried to restrain the mercenary. James came in with the girl, Lopa presumably, letting her run to her friends as he tugged the door shut behind him. For all the good an incredibly breakable glass pane would do against anything in the dungeon, he'd still prefer to have it closed. He took a deep breath. The air already smelled different. Whatever the smell of their teleportation had been, it had faded rapidly. But now, even the coffee and pastry scent of the cafe was being pushed down, something thick and cloying coming in from outside, a sickly sweet smell that was thin now but growing bit by bit. James had noticed it when he was rushing out after the students, along with the fact that the air here was warmer than the wintry chill back on Earth, but now that he wasn't shooting anything, it was harder to get away from. That wasn't important, though. What was important was that there were people here in the middle of a dungeon where someone had fucking teleported the whole building. And then died. The dying part was important. James saw Harlan checking the body and winced. That wasn't a good look. "All right," he said to himself. It wasn't like he didn't know what to do, really. He just hadn't planned on this today, and he was tired. "Okay, excuse me, everyone." He raised his voice. The yelling came back, and worse. People noticed him, noticed he wasn't panicking. Someone demanded to know what he had done. Someone else started crying. This was a lot different than last time. "Holy shit, I'm not good at this," James breathed out. He knew, for a fact, that trying to yell over everyone wouldn't help. The darkened room was packed with people who were scared, half of them of him, and yelling wasn't going to solve anything. And worse, they were on some kind of time limit to get organized. "Okay, I'd like to explain what's happening. Can everyone please just not panic for a second? I realize that's kind of a stupid thing to say, but we've got to sort this out." The words, said with a kind of self-aware humor at how dumb they sounded, actually worked a little bit. The people who heard James gave the kind of nervous laughs that you got when someone who was having the worst day of their life suddenly heard a joke. People around them noticed too, and while the sounds of the crowd didn't cease, a lot of them did turn their phone flashlights toward James, illuminating him standing in the middle of the floor. Further helping, one of the baristas spoke up. "I know him. He's okay." Something small and meaningless, but even that little thing was reassuring to the cluster of civilians. "All right," James said, taking another deep breath. "What happened to us?" someone shouted, and got a wave of agreement. Before that could get too loud and waste more time, James gave a rapid answer. "It looks like the whole building got moved somewhere else, somewhere pretty dangerous from the looks of things." He glanced back to the injured student, high school or college he didn't know, where the other barista had gotten out their own first aid kit from under the counter and was using too many bandages to seal up her puncture wounds. "I know how weird this sounds," James said. "You can argue with me later, and you won't when you see what's outside. If anyone has cell service, call who you can, but I doubt it's going to work. Let me know if you do. I've got a number that can help. Right now, is anyone else injured?" Everyone checked themselves over, and a pair of women who reminded James of more pleasant versions of his mom started checking on everyone else. There was an older man in a wheelchair who couldn't actually talk much, and whose caretaker had been outside when they'd warped. The husband of a married couple who had gotten his ankle stomped during the frantic explosion of panic earlier, too. "They're going to be dead weight," Harlan said, from where they slipped up to James's side. It didn't sound malicious, just appraising. "No, they aren't," James said with a sigh. Harlan looked at him, and a few people who heard him gave alarmed looks as well. "Wow, that's pretty mercenary of you, and I'm saying that, which I think means something." In response, James pulled his backup telepad out of a coat pocket. "Wheel that guy over to the armless dude. Excuse me, ma'am, can you move your husband over by the door?" He raised his voice. "The two injured girls in the back, Lopa, and, I don't know, whoever's hurt. All 6 of you, up here, please. If you need help, ask." James took a pen and wrote the lair's coordinates as they nervously collected themselves. The EMT gave him a worried look as he kept pressure on the severed stump of the man's arm. "He's going into shock," he told James. "If no one's coming—" "Yeah," James said with a sigh. "All right, you 6, hold hands or, he mentally slapped his forehead as he looked at the one-armed victim on the floor. "Skin contact in some way. Hands are easiest, but you 6 need to be touching." "Why?" the girl who had been bitten asked. Her makeup had lines carved by tears in it, and her voice was high-pitched and close to breaking from the pain. "What's happening? Are you going to kill us?" "No," James said reassuringly. "There's a guaranteed way to safety." He looked down at the telepad in his hand and briefly considered a lot of things. Then he stopped considering, crushed the blooming seed of guilt in his chest, and did what he was always going to do anyway. "But it only works for 6 people, so here." He handed the girl the telepad. "Link up. Everyone good? Yeah? Okay. Tear the page. You keep a grip on that wound, okay? There will be people where you arrive who will help you. Tell them everything. Tell them we're not dead. And... He looked out the dark window. James didn't have time for this, didn't have time to waste having a panic attack now. "When you meet Anesh or Alana, tell them I love them very much, and I'll see them when I get out of here." He grinned at the assembled group. "My name's James, by the way. I'll ask you guys yours when I get back. Now go." The girl gave him a weird, disbelieving look, but tore the page anyway, and left James standing in a now partly clear part of the cafe near the front door, next to a crouched EMT in an empty wheelchair. He hoped that last part wasn't going to be too much of a problem. "What about us?" the man whispered, kind of glossing over the fact that he just watched 6 people teleport. "We get out the hard way," James said, turning back to everyone who had been watching. "And from now on I'm carrying more than one backup. Actually, shit, Harlan, teleport us out of here." "Can't, Paladin." Harlan shrugged. "Mine needs to be targeted." "They all need to be targeted. Don't fucking tell me there are teleports that are random. That's insane, and I'm running out of patience for your magical bullshit today," James called back to them. Harlan just gave James an unamused level stare. "Targeted from the outside." He repressed an urge to sigh again. Nothing was ever easy. Teleportation was supposed to make life easy. "Okay," James waved his arms. "Everyone come on in. Gather round. We gotta sort this out." "Yeah, I'd love to know what's happening aside from you telling us we're gonna die," the EMT said in a voice that was more steady than James expected. "Where'd those people go?" a man in a pink beanie and a lot of tie-dye asked, pointing to the door. "And is this going to impact my tips?" one of the baristas asked. James looked at the barista first. So did everybody else. A couple people started yelling at them to shut up, to not make jokes, that this was serious, but James found himself laughing. "Oh, man. Yeah," he nodded sagely. "It's also going to ruin your resume. You'll go apply to a job and they'll say, 'Why did you leave your last position?' And you'll have to tell them the building got kicked out of reality. That is going to be awkward for you." He cleared his throat and scanned the group, noticing a few twitchy smiles. At least he'd gotten them around to not thinking he was going to shoot them, though. But maybe he should keep Harlan back for a while. "Okay, I'm going to say some shit and it's going to sound insane, and I acknowledge that. Please wait until the end to interrupt and tell me I'm stupid. James took a long breath. I'm part of a group that explores spaces connected to our world but outside of reality. This appears to be one of them. I don't know how an entire building got dumped into it, or which one this is, or why that asshole decided you were all acceptable collateral, but I can tell you, this place is going to be hostile to us. As for the people who vanished earlier, I had a way to teleport on me, so I sent them home because they were the 6 who were most vulnerable or injured, and that's the cap. Hey, you didn't have a right to make that choice for us. A man with perfectly wavy hair and a soul patch and scarf that matched his outfit choice of everything black snapped at James. Okay, I will not be engaging with that right now. James bluntly shut him down and ignored the indignant sputtering. So, here's the only way this is going to work. We need to figure out where we are, figure out where the exit is, and figure out how to get from here to there without dying, because let me tell you, we're sitting here and it seems fine, but this place is not nice. But I swear I will do everything I can to get you all home. Harlan too, though they're going to be creepy about it. James gestured toward Harlan. Home is an illusion, kid, the guy in what James instantly thought of as too much tie-dye told him. Your home is wherever God put you. James nodded politely. Okay, he said. I'm glad that works for you. I'm going to put myself and everyone else somewhere else, and I'll keep you safe if you want to come with me. Why us? One of the students asked in a shaking voice that bordered on a whine. Understandable, really, so James didn't hold that against her. Why is this happening to me? I think someone was trying to murder Harlan and didn't care who was around. James jerked his thumb over to where Harlan was lurking by one of the windows, the mercenary peering out into the night. I'd ask him, but... A lot of people's eyes crept over to where the human corpse was still slumped on the floor. They killed him. What? Harlan asked as they rejoined the group. Who? You. Him. Killed. James pointed and glared. Did I? Harlan asked. Huh. Hope he deserved it. James widened his eyes, face tight. Are you fucking kidding me? He demanded. I don't joke. What's happening? One of the baristas asked in a mutter. Harlan, you fucking... How have you lived this long? James burst out in a sudden yell. This is the most reckless shit I have ever seen. You can't just feed every new memory you make back into more violence. What the fuck are you even doing? Harlan faced him with a curious and stoic expression. I'm doing what is needed to win, they said. Why would you ever do anything less? They flipped something through the air to James, a single 9mm bullet, but something was wrong with it. It vibrated in James's palm as he snatched it out of the air. Because I've got priorities beyond shooting people? I don't fucking know. A million reasons, James snapped at them. No more feeding your memories into bullets. You forget, you are not my leader. We're equals here. Harlan looked at James evenly. Or so I've been told. In the background, James caught the edge of someone whispering, Mom and Dad are fighting, and a snicker from one of the students next to them. It was almost funny enough to make him less angry, but only almost. He pressed the knuckles of a hand into his forehead. All right, he exhaled. I hate you so much right now. Does anyone here have a problem with anything else so far aside from this asshole? No one said anything. No one gonna ask if magic is real or something? That's usually how this goes, James inquired. The EMT jerked his chin up at James in a nod, wiping blood off his hands with napkins and a bottle of water. You've got an extra arm. Oh, right. James dismissed the climb spell, letting his new limb break into fragile ice that would probably be a slipping hazard on the floor if nobody cleaned it up. He kicked it over underneath one of the tables. Okay, we need to take stock here. Does anyone have any military experience? No one raised their hands, which actually kind of surprised James. One of the guys that was in here, James was positive he had seen around the cafe before in camouflage fatigues, but he guessed that was just a bizarre fashion choice. When it came to medical, though, there were several hits. The study group were actually med students, and with the EMT they had a good 5 people left who knew a bit more than basic first aid. For other useful skills, one guy went camping a lot, the guy in the beanie got a lot more direct about being homeless and knowing how to manage rough living, and that was kind of it. I'm a history major who reads poetry all day instead of working. What the hell am I supposed to contribute to an adventuring party? The scarfed man cut to the heart of the issue with a sentence that annihilated the irritation James had felt toward him. I do SCA stuff. Does that count? A guy with a beard worthy of a dwarf warrior and an eye patch to match offered. Well, used to. He tapped his leg with the cane in his hand, and James really wanted to ask what had happened, since he looked late 30s at most. That counts enough. Harlan, give him a sword, James said. What? No. Harlan frowned. That's my sword. Are you going to use a sword and a gun at the same time, like you're an action movie hero that can aim one-handed and cut through trees without leverage? James provoked. Yes. No, you are not. Besides, we'll need someone to run rearguard. Give him your sword, please. Huh, interesting. Notes were right. You did ask nicely. Harlan pulled back the sleeve of their turtleneck and flicked their arm, the tattoo of a blade slipping off their skin and into the real world in a flash of sickly light that was only visible in the darkness. They handed out the sword, hilt first, to the man, who took it with a look of deep confusion, shifting in the creaking cafe chair as he did. So, what's your plan, Paladin? They asked. For what? For getting out of this context, Harlan said. You know we can't just go in a straight line. We're dead unless we have a way to find the exit, so what is it? Oh, that. James nodded. Okay, everyone who's new here, please don't panic. I'd like to introduce you to a friend of mine. He dipped his mind down into itself, prodded at something deep in his chest, layering onto the nudge the feeling of needing to go somewhere, of being in motion. And a few seconds later, a dusty orange light began to clad his shoulder and left arm, trailing down his back into a feathered tail as Zhu pulled himself awake and into his manifestation. The navigator opened a set of eyes from his feathered pauldron as he formed. Hello, he greeted the crowd. So this is a really elaborate practical joke, right? Someone spoke up. One of the study group that had remained started shouting, The streetlight tried to eat us. As the cafe patrons broke into a spirited argument, James cocked his head to look at Zhu. I won't lie, I thought they'd be more interested in you. How's it feel? He asked. Being ignored? The navigator questioned. No different. I'm not like the others that need the right balance of thought about them to be. I am content with the motor control center of your brain and the existence of an atlas. James squinted. Really? He asked. Because you sound pretty indignant right there. Zhu made a strange sound like tires slipping on wet metal, which James took to be some kind of haughty grunt. I can't get us out, though, he continued in a smaller voice. I can't even feel for how far away we are without it costing me. Costing you, and it isn't distance. Not just distance. There's something familiarly wrong here. Wrong like it's a dungeon? James murmured. Wrong like the shape of it is unpleasant, Zhu muttered back, dusty orange light pulsing along his body in a way that lit up the space around them. James felt a dark feeling in his chest, the stirring again of that thought that maybe, this time, he wasn't going to be getting out of this alive, that they really were in too deep now, and he wasn't just looking at a tough run back to the escape, but something much, much worse. He still didn't even know what the dungeon looked like, aside from a brief skirmish across a sidewalk and part of a normal enough street. That should be first on their list of things to fix. Okay. James held up a hand and waited impatiently for the tense and angry kidnapped patrons to stop their internal arguments. Okay, he added more loudly when that didn't work. We need to know what we're working with. So far, nothing's tried to break in here, which is good, but we can't count on it. Let's get most of these chairs and tables up against the windows and move everyone to the back, okay? He glanced at a barista who shrugged at him. Any sense of company loyalty that they should keep people out of the employee-only area vanished when the power, water, and sun did. Alright, good. Harlan, keep an eye on things here. I need 2 people who want to get out of table stacking duty who want to come with me and take a closer look around. Wait, they have a gun. Why don't you take them? The history poet complained. I don't have a gun. You don't have to come. I can... Of course I do. I might die. They sounded too enthusiastic about that. James was worried they might think this was a joke. James tipped his head in a series of tiny jerks as he tried to process the sentence. Alright, whatever. Also, Harlan's staying here because I want an experienced fighter on site in case something shows up, and I'm not going alone because places like this tend to have stuff that kills loners instantly. In my experience. Your experience is fucking wild, man, the drifter said around a mouthful of muffin that one of the baristas had given him. I want to check this out. Alright, everyone else move your stuff. Get the back door blocked. If you've got phones or laptops, turn them off to save battery. James paused. Are there emergency lights here? He asked. Harlan pulled the neck of their turtleneck aside. I've got us covered, they said, lighting up the interior and casting reflections across the black pane glass around the cafe as one of their tattoos writhed off their skin and into the world. A rainbow macaw clawing its way into being, glittering beads of light dripping from it like water to evaporate in the air around itself. It cocked its head at the assembled patrons, trilling and chirping lightly before hopping onto a table and strutting back and forth as a mobile avian lamp. It left a trail. That's fucking cool, someone said. Several someones, really. James was one of them, too. He wasn't above admitting that that was, in fact, fucking cool. He wanted a rainbow bird lamp. He helped move a couple of the heavier tables up against one of the broad windows, and aided in mopping up the pool of blood by the front door, too, while the other 2 who were coming with him stowed their stuff and tried to find anything to defend themselves with. There was a broom and a mop in the back of the little eatery that a barista helped remove the heads from, leaving a couple mostly sturdy wooden poles. That and a couple of kitchen knives shoved into belts, and aside from that, well... James had gotten used to having an armory, and a strategy, and a team that he'd worked with on more delves than he could remember. At least the people here were being more or less reasonable. No one was trying to do anything stupid yet, at least. Everyone was showing a remarkable amount of calm for the situation. He got the names of his 2 temporary partners for this scouting operation. Aurelio, who told James he could just call him Leo if that was too hard to pronounce, in the kind of voice of someone who was exhaustedly familiar with hearing that, and Dell from the other man, who started a long and uncomfortable explanation of his name as something he chose after escaping the foster care system and finding God in the middle of the woods while high on mushrooms. It was uncomfortable to James anyway. Aurelio seemed to be taking notes on the other man's tragic backstory. Alright, Harlan, keep this place together. I'll be back when I'm out of bullets, James said, and then slowly pushed the front door open, wincing as he noticed the blood spray on the outside from where a man's arm had been severed outside the radius of the teleport. It was almost pitch black here. In the indeterminate distance there were orange dots of street lights hanging overhead, but when James looked up, he couldn't even tell if there was a sky. There was a breeze that felt like the outdoors, although it had that same sickly sweet smell as it had been seeping into the building. He flicked on the flashlight on his phone, set to a low power, and led the way out into the darkness, with Jiu lighting up the space around him in an equal orange glow. The first thing that became clear was that whatever had brought them here, it brought the building. And only the building. Underfoot, something crunched, and it took him a step or 2 to realize he was walking on bark chips. The patio of the cafe was gone, tables, fire pit, and everything else. "Aw, man," Dell said in a voice that was far too loud. "My bike was out here, dude. All my stuff is gone." "I think," James spoke quietly, "that your bike is right where you left it. We moved. It stayed behind." He swept the light around, trying to get a sense for where they were. "Tell you what, I'll get you out of here fast enough you can probably find it." The environment wasn't, as he had worried, completely pitch black. The sky was dark, but it was a shade lighter than everything else, just barely, so it was possible to see objects against it. It certainly wasn't easy to see at all, but his eyes adjusted to the glow Zhu was putting off around them, and James started to get an impression of where they were, and what was nearby. He turned around and looked at the cafe, a dark, boxy silhouette, with flickers of white lights inside from phones and the emergency flashlight they'd had under the counter. Around it there were tall and narrow figures reaching up to the sky, like trees. But if they were trees, they didn't sway in the breeze like James figured they should have. He looked back ahead of them as they took some cautious steps forward, where he could see the texture of the ground change. As James stepped off the bark chips and onto what was more clearly cracked concrete, the tree things gave way on either side of him, and he could see the orange glow of streetlights to his left and right. Well, sort of to his left and right. He'd almost tripped as this patch of sidewalk had been at an angle. The cafe hadn't landed evenly. Once more he glanced back at that building. It was easy to see the shape of it now. It was definitely lopsided, or at least not lined up with the tall shapes around it, nor the sidewalk. The sidewalk lined a road, the shape of which he could make out, an asphalt outline that almost gave James a sense of security. After all, if anything too serious showed up, he could just stab it with the street. But then he remembered his time in Route Horizon, where control of the material was fleeting and sporadic at best, contested by the dungeon that had a much more powerful hold over it. And he didn't really feel like a life-or-death situation here would be the best place to test his luck. "Where are all the cars?" Dell asked. "Why did I agree to this?" Aurelio whispered, looking like he was having trouble taking steps, fear holding him back. Understandably. James didn't bother to tell him that he had volunteered and that he had done so after saying he wouldn't be good at it. "Looks like we landed in something like a park or an empty lot," he spoke softly, but pointedly did not whisper. "Okay, ground rules. Speak in a low tone. It doesn't carry as far as a whisper does. We check in every few minutes to make sure no one got snatched by something in the dark, but don't talk unless there's a reason. You two stay behind me. If things look really bad, don't try to help. Book it. Get Harlan." "You have spent too long practicing that spiel," Aurelio told him. James could practically hear the creaking of wood as the other man tried to crush the makeshift weapon in his hands out of anxiety. A dozen small quips jumped to James's lips. He wanted to say he'd done this before, or that he'd practiced on a live audience, or that practicing in front of a mirror was easy when you were as good looking as he was. But that last one he had stolen from JP, so it didn't count. But instead, he took his own advice, and waved a hand downward in the orange light that Zhu was putting off, quieting both of the other men. "We go that way, but not too far. Try to keep track of the way back to this spot. Be careful about the lights and any hedges. That's what I've got so far. Actually, let's walk in the road." Even though he'd run into it earlier, he was still apprehensive about the street. That old lived experience of not wanting to get hit by a car sticking with him. Also, he wasn't sure if it was dangerous on its own, so James tested it with the toe of his shoe first. But when nothing happened, he started walking, the other two falling in behind him, though James noted that one of his temporary squad mates walked too quick to stay at his side, while the other guy stuck near the sidewalk a ways away, tapping at the ground with his stick like he was using it as a cane. There were no cars on the side of the road, as had been mentioned, though when he was standing in the middle of it, James could only barely see the curb. It was like being submerged in an inky black pool. Outlines in the distance he could see, barely, but around him there was nothing, just road and sidewalk. If he wasn't being very careful, he would have already lost track of what direction the cafe was. As they got closer to the part of the street illuminated by assuredly predatory streetlights, James started to make out larger shapes on the edges of the road. Not like the trees that reached into the sky, these were just rough triangles poking up into that slightly lighter shade. It was like trying to see the dark part of the moon against the night sky. Possible, but only if you were really looking, and only under good conditions. "Roofs," James said, pointing with his left arm so Zhu got a view of exactly what he was looking at too, and so the other two could follow the glowing line of it. "There's buildings around us." That's good, right? Aurelio asked. We can just go ask for help. We're probably just in Canada or something. Keep your voice down, James hissed. And no, look at the sky. This isn't anywhere on Earth, and... He froze as a couple 100 meters ahead of them, someone came into view under a distant streetlight. Several someones, actually. All of them shorter than James by a little bit, maybe capping out at 5 feet tall. They were all wearing dark hooded sweatshirts that obscured their faces, which was a massive red flag already, and they were walking in a very tight group. The noise of laughter and chatter reached James and his companions as the group moved through the light. And then Dell made the stupidest move James could have possibly imagined from a survivor in a dungeon. "Hey!" his voice echoed over the unnaturally quiet false night. "Hey, over here! Hey guys, we're lost! Where'd you all come from?" His coat flapped as he waved his arms over his head. "Oh, you fucking..." James drew his pistol in a motion that was becoming far too practiced, double-checking the safety as the crowd of human-shaped figures stopped sharply, still mostly underneath the puddle of light. "Over here!" came a yell from their direction. "Hey, you guys!" The voices sounded like teenagers, but the words, James realized, were loops of what Dell had just yelled at them. "Hey! Here! Lost! Here!" The sounds of speech blurred together with mocking laughter and the rapid slapping of steps on pavement as the cluster began moving. Just as sharply as they had stopped, exploding forward out of the light, they almost totally vanished into the darkness between where they had been spotted and where James was standing. "Fuck me," James hissed. "Dell, get back!" "Nah, man, it's fine. They're a bunch of kids," Dell called over, far too loudly, from where James could just barely see his form in the darkness. And then, abruptly, he started screaming as the pack of hooded figures swarmed over him without hesitation, edges of their dark clothing illuminated in orange by the streetlight at their backs and Jew ahead of them. It was hard to tell what was happening, but when the sound of flesh tearing started up, James started shooting. His heightened aim letting him extrapolate and hit targets in the dark even if he couldn't still see them, a kind of magically induced instinct on where they might be, and absolutely were, that he'd never noticed before and needed to learn to push farther. The gunshots got attention. Ahead of them, the streetlight twisted slightly to peer in their direction, and the hooded mob peeled away from Dell's fallen form, moving like a single organism as they ran for the cover of true darkness on the side of the road. James didn't stop shooting at them, emptying his magazine rapidly and swapping out for one of his 2 remaining spares in a fluid snap of his hands. "Dell!" he yelled into the sudden quiet. "Fuck. Okay, stay with me," he said to Aurelio, who had frozen entirely and was gripping his staff in front of his face with both hands, twitching at every noise. Regrettably, none of those noises were footsteps, the band of what were clearly not human teenagers having gone totally silent as soon as they were out of even the thin amount of sight that James had. Even his aim couldn't find them. Creeping forward, he made it to where Dell had been standing, or at least to the edge of the scene of the attack. A wet gurgle alerted him to the fact that Dell was still alive, which James would not have guessed otherwise. One of the man's arms was bent, wrapped around under his back with bones sticking out in 2 places. Several layers of clothing had been shredded open, and his stomach underneath hadn't held up any better, intestines and gore splayed around with a stench of filth and blood. He was missing an eye, his remaining eye bloodied and wide, staring up at nothing as James tried to keep down the urge to throw up. Aurelio didn't manage that, vomiting whatever was left of his coffee and pastry that he had from the cafe not even an hour ago onto the pavement. "We need to get back, now," James hissed, flicking his eyes around for any sign of blood that wasn't human. He couldn't tell if he'd hit or even damaged the hoodies, which was generally a really bad sign in a dungeon. But he... The words were a frantic stammer, one hand from Aurelio pointing a shaking finger at the person who had, within the last few seconds, transformed into a corpse. They... "Yeah, I know. We need to go back, now," James said, putting a hand on Aurelio's shoulder and firmly pushing him, half guiding him to return the way they came. with a lot less careful movement and a lot more hurried, powered walking this time. Stumbling over bark chips to the door of the cafe, realizing he hadn't had a way to tell anyone inside he was coming back, but with Zhu wrapped around his arm being a good indicator that he was who he said he was, James and Aurelio slipped inside the building as Harlan opened the door barricade for them. "How was it?" the mercenary asked. "Also, where's the bum?" "He didn't make it, and don't be an asshole," James answered reflexively. Holy shit, that was so fast. He holstered his gun, shaking out sweaty palms as the event caught up to him. Feeling dazed and unsteady, James stumbled to the counter where drinks were served up, setting his palms flat on the cool surface as he stared into nothing. "I don't know where we are," James said, "but we're deep enough in that wandering life can rip a human open with its hands in seconds." "Some contexts are like that," Harlan nodded. "If we're on the outskirts, that's a good sign. If we're deep enough, it doesn't mean anything." "How could that possibly be a good sign?" James snapped, glad that most of the people here were in the back and wouldn't have to see him starting to lose his cool. "Harlan, we're fucked if that's what this place is like." "Strong guardians can always be handled with more firepower. If a context is focused on that, it often doesn't have the worst kinds of other problems. Weather, infection, mind control, that sort of thing." Harlan tipped their head at James. "That's one of the important things the Wolfpack learned over a lot of casualties." "Or so your notes say." James didn't bother holding back the bitter words. "Yeah," Harlan agreed without hesitation or even annoyance. "Some things are better forgotten. Impersonal, professional, that's our way. It works for us." "I don't want to have this argument now," James said, utterly exhausted and sickened. I don't know what to say to you that would matter now. We're in so much trouble. We don't have firepower, unless you have a rocket launcher tattooed somewhere on your ass." "No, though cards on the table I do have a set of ball lightning inks." Harlan finished replacing the furniture barricade and turned back to James. "You're a survivor, a killer. The two of us, at least, will make it out." James snapped his head up, an abrupt and unwelcome snarl on his face. "And what about everyone else?" he demanded. "You've got these professional ethics and your fucking flowchart on how to act properly and all that power, and what the fuck are you doing with it?" He stabbed a finger in Harlan's direction. "Just surviving? That's it? Kill things, take their stuff, get by, don't worry about anyone caught up with you?" James took a shaking breath, and then, in a quieter tone, added, "You know this was targeted at you. You're not the reason everyone is here. You're sure as fuck not responsible for this. That's not how it works. But you've made enemies you don't even remember, and you could maybe show a little fucking compassion for the people who are turning into collateral damage." "No," Harlan answered bluntly. "Because I didn't do this. You said it already. Someone else killed everyone here, not me. I won't feel guilty for that. And if I did, I'd just use it as ammo anyway." Harlan didn't even look angry at James for his outburst, just mildly curious. "I'll try to help, but they're flat, and civilians too. They're already dead, no matter what we do." Harlan smiled slightly. "I guess we are having this argument now." "Guess so," James said, voice hard. "And you're wrong. I've done this before. I've been here before. This sucks, and I'm about to fall apart, but it's not hopeless, so don't write everyone off ahead of schedule." He took a deep breath, then another, realized he was still panting from exertion and stress and anger, and tried to steady it out, just ended up sighing instead. In a small voice, he tried to set aside his frustration. "Anything serious happen while I was gone?" "No. Hard to see outside, though. What are we looking at?" "Streets and houses, I think," James said, trying to be professional. "Like you said, hard to see. We didn't get close enough to anything. Barely got a block away before—" He trailed off, a rush of emotion shoving its way up his throat. "Yeah. Waiting for morning might be our best option, assuming this place has morning." "If it doesn't?" The question wasn't accusatory, it was just tactical. Harlan was a consummate professional at all times, after all. James shrugged. "Then we secure one of the houses, start moving building to building until we find something we can use as a way out. Worst case, we set something on fire and use that." Something in this case being, I don't know, whatever the forest around us is, a few houses. James wasn't feeling especially restrained right now. Alright, I'm gonna go check on the... Whatever he was about to say was cut off, as from the back kitchen, a broken, warbling scream resounded, followed by the smashing of porcelain and the metal clanging of pans hitting the floor. "Stay here," he ordered Harlan, who seemed content enough to follow the command. Maybe he shouldn't have taunted fate, James thought, as he vaulted over the front counter. Following Zhu's traced orange lines in the air as he avoided slipping on anything while he ran for the back.